Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hussam Aldeeb. I'm the International Student Career Advisor at Mohawk College. Today, we have the pleasure of having Elizabeth Long and Zia Sumar present to us, who are immigration law experts from Long and Galgi, LLP, which is a law firm that specializes in immigration law. Some of the topics that will be discussed today include how to maintain your status as a student, conditions of working legally as a student, how to apply for your post-secondary work permit, strategies on qualifying for permanent residence under express entry and non-express entry economic categories, and what to do if your application has been denied.
All right, let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how you can get your permanent residence, but before we actually get there, it's very important that we talk about a few things about how you should maintain your temporary status and what you can do while you have your temporary status in order to prepare for your permanent residence.
Perfect. So like Elizabeth was talking about, it's really important that while you're here in Canada, you're maintaining your status. Okay, so if you have a study permit that's expiring soon, you want to make sure that you're applying to extend that study permit before it expires. Okay, as long as you submit your extension application properly prior to that expiry date, you'll have what's called implied or maintained status. So implied status or maintained status means that you can continue studying or working. So basically you have the same conditions as your original study permit while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. Okay, it's really important though that your application is submitted properly. If you forget to include, for example, the fees, the application fees, that application is considered incomplete and it gets returned back to you. So it's as if you had never filed that extension application. Okay, so as long as you file that application properly, you'll hold implied status until you get a decision on that extension application. Now, what happens if you forget? So if you miss that expiry date by accident, we have what's called a restoration period. So this means that for individuals who have lost their status, you have a period of 90 days to file an application to restore your status, to get your status back. Okay. This applies for anyone who's missed the expiry date, for example, if your application gets refused, or even if your application gets returned. But the way that we calculate those 90 days will differ in each of these situations. So where you have forgotten, let's say you missed that deadline of the expiry of your study permit, you have 90 days from that date that's listed on your study permit to file the restoration application. If your application was filed incorrectly and it gets returned, you have, again, only 90 days from the date that's listed on your study permit. However, if your application is refused, so you submit it properly, you held your implied status, but that application was refused, you have 90 days from that refusal to submit a restoration application. Now, a question we get often is IRCC's website says that you have to file your extension applications 30 days before the expiry date that's listed on your study permit. That's incorrect. The law is that you have to file your extension applications before the expiry date that's listed on your study permit. So it's great if you're able to file it 30 days in advance, but the law is that it just has to be filed before the expiry date.
Okay. Okay, so the second thing that I want to speak to you guys about is the difference between high-skilled and low-skilled work. So currently the system is, it's all under what's called the NOC classification, National Occupation Classification Codes. The current NOC codes are divided into 5 categories. NOC O, A, and B are considered high-skilled. NOC C and D are considered low-skilled. Okay, and so right now, when we talk about permanent residence, you'll see that for the most part, high-skilled work is what gets priority in terms of your ability to apply for permanent residence. There are very few low-skilled permanent residence categories. Starting in sometime this year, apparently, the government will be implementing a new sort of classification called the tier system, okay, TEER, which will be 6 tiers. And what they're saying is tier 0, and it's still going to be high skilled and low skilled distinction, but it's going to change a little bit for some occupations. So tier 0 to 3, those are going to be classified as high skilled, and 5 and 6 are going to be low skilled. Now, some of the changes that we've heard may be coming into place. 3 occupations may no longer be classified as high skilled. Those are the program leaders in recreation, sports, and fitness, tailors, dressmakers, and other performers not elsewhere classified. But there will be 16 new occupations that previously were considered low skilled that will now be high skilled, including transport truck drivers, nurses' aides, heavy equipment operators, payroll administrators. Okay, so stay tuned. What we'll be doing is, when these changes do come into place, we send out newsletters in terms and talk about the new laws that are coming in, because immigration law in Canada changes so much and so fast. And what we'll do is we're going to sign you guys up if you've registered to the newsletter. Feel free to, if you don't find it useful, then feel free to disengage. But this is the only way we're going to be able to let you guys know about new changes to the law. So when something like this happens, when the new system is actually implemented, it's not yet, but they've announced that they want to implement it this year. When it is implemented, then we will also let you guys know through the newsletter.
Perfect. So some conditions on your study permit are obvious, like for example, the expiry date, right? It's written on there. We know when you have to apply for your extension or apply for another status by. However, there are other conditions that are not as obvious. They're implied on you. And one of them is that you must be actively pursuing your studies. Okay, so what this means is that you have to be making progress towards the completion of your program anytime you're here in Canada on that study permit. The rule is that once you stop studying, whether it's that you finish your program early or you leave your program of study, you lose your status 90 days after you stop studying. Okay, so at any point in time when you stop studying, 90 days following that, you have now lost status on your study permit, regardless of what that expiry date is that's listed there. The 2 exceptions to that is if you're on a scheduled break or an authorized leave. Now, when we say scheduled break, what IRCC is referring to is a break in the academic calendar for your program at your school. Okay, so it's not a break that you've decided to take on your own, or if you decide that you want a semester off or a couple weeks off. That's not a break. You can't just add a break into your program. It is one that's part of the academic calendar for your program. The other exception is if you're on an authorized leave. This is where the school has approved you being on a break from your studies. Okay, if you are going on an authorized leave, it's really important. Obviously, you do have to let your school know. You have to get that authorization from your school, and we recommend that you get it in writing as well, because it'll come in handy later when you're applying for either a subsequent study permit or when you're applying for your work permit. Now, I will mention here as well, because if there is the strike, that does not affect your study permit status. Okay, it is beyond your control. IRCC does recognize that, so that will not mean that you lose your status on your study permit. Now, a lot of you or some of you may have been studying outside of Canada during the pandemic. So right from March 2020, IRCC basically had to move and make changes and policies and put policies in place for individuals that needed to be studying online and outside of Canada. Basically, having studied outside of Canada because of COVID and because of the pandemic will not make you ineligible for the postgrad work permit. So any classes that you take up until summer 2022 will not affect eligibility for your postgrad work permit. With that being said, and we'll talk about this more in a couple minutes, but with that being said, there may still be issues in obtaining points in express entry for your Canadian studies if you've done those programs or majority of those classes online and outside of Canada. But well, Elizabeth will talk about that more when we get into express entry. Now, of course, a big question we always get is, can I work while I'm here in Canada studying? So the study permit does allow full-time students to work using your study permit. Now you can work part-time during the school year and full-time during any regularly scheduled break. So during the school year, while you're in classes, while you're a full-time student, you can work up to 20 hours a week. And during any breaks, you're able to work. There's no limitation in terms of the hours that you can work off campus. If you're in your last semester and in order to graduate, to finish your program, you only need a part-time course load, you are still able to work off campus using your study permit. Okay, so yes, the rule is that you need to be a full-time student in order to use your study permit to work off campus. The exception to that is where you're in your final semester and you only require a part-time course load in order to complete the program. Like Elizabeth mentioned earlier, if there is a strike, you are still able to use your study permit and work off campus up to 20 hours a week. So part-time while the strike is ongoing. If there's any schedule, if the strike goes on where there would normally be a regularly scheduled break, that period of time, it defaults back to the regular rules where you're able to work full-time during that period. The ability to work on your study permit is tied to you being a full-time student. So as soon as you have completed your program, as soon as you are no longer a full-time student, you have to stop working on that study permit. Okay, so what this means is that if you're in your final semester, you finish your classes, but you're still waiting for your grades, at that point, you're still a student. It's as soon as the school lets you know that you have completed your program of study, that you are no longer a student and you have to stop working on that study permit. Okay, Elizabeth will talk a little bit more about the postgrad work permit in a moment and how you can start working again. But it is important to know that as soon as you have completed your program of study, you're no longer a student and you do need to stop working on that study permit. Similarly, if you're on an authorized leave, so if you've taken a break from your program, you're not able to work using that study permit while you're on a leave. Lastly, if you're in between programs, so let's say you finish your first program of study and you're starting a second program, as long as you have been accepted into that second program of study, you still have a valid study permit, and the period of time between your two programs is less than 150 days, you can work full-time between those programs while you're waiting for your second program to start.
So Zia, let's run through some scenarios here for the students. Okay, so let's say I'm a student and I was set to graduate and finish everything in April, okay? The strike happens. And so when the strike happens, what can I do at that point?
So you can still work off campus part-time, so up to 20 hours a week during what would have been the normal semester.
Right, and if I had a job full-time on campus, I could do that as well, right?
Yes, exactly. So the same rules apply while the strike is ongoing.
It's as if, you know, you're still in class. Okay, so what about after the schedule? So after May, it's supposed to be a scheduled break. Can I work full-time then if after April and I'm not graduated yet?
Yeah, if the summer semester was supposed to be a scheduled break for you anyways, then yes, you would be able to work full-time during that period.
Okay. And let's say hopefully the strike ends sometime in May and we get to go and finish our semester in, let's say, July. Okay. So when we are finishing the semester, what's our status then?
So then you're going back and you'd be a full-time student at that point. And so you'd revert back to the maximum hours that you'd be allowed as a full-time student, which would be the 20 hours a week.
Okay. And let's say in July, I finish my exams, but I don't have my grades yet. What's my situation then?
So at that point, you're still a full-time student until you receive your grades, which means you can still only work up to 20 hours a week.
Okay. And let's say in July 30th, let's say, I get my grades, and I get a notification from the school that I've completed my studies. It's not a letter, it's just online that they've told me. What's my situation then?
As soon as you receive anything in writing that tells you that you finished your program of study, even if it's just your final grades that have been released, that means that you are no longer a student and you have to stop working.
Okay. And then we'll talk about this later, but if you apply for your postgrad work permit, then
you can start working full-time while you're waiting for that postgrad work permit.
Okay, great. Now, what if my study permit expires before I can finish my program?
If your study permit is expiring before you're
let's say it expires in June. Yeah, let's say it expires in June. Yeah.
Then it's important to be looking at applying for an extension, unfortunately.
Yeah, before
of that study permit
expires. Yeah, I would say, guys, if your study permit is going to expire, so normally you should have a study permit that is valid for 90 days after your program ends. That's the rule that the officers are supposed to give you to allow you to have time to apply, for postgrad work permit. So if your study permit is going to expire before that date, you may want to go and apply for an extension. And usually you want to apply within 4 months of the expiry of your study permit. Okay. All right, let's talk about the postgrad work permit. So one of these days, you guys are going to get there. You're going to graduate, okay? And what do we do then? So the first question that you should be asking yourself is not necessarily when can I apply for the postgrad work permit, but should you apply for a postgrad work permit, okay? Because the postgrad work permit, you can only get one in your lifetime. And it's very important that you do what you need to do while you have the postgrad work permit, because when you want to apply for another work permit, you may not qualify for another work permit, right? Most of the time, for people to obtain a work permit, you have to have an employer who applies for what's called an LMIA, a labor market impact assessment, where they go to the labor department and they say, we can't find another Canadian who can do this job. And that's very difficult, A, to convince an employer to do that, and B, for an employer to obtain it if you don't have any particularly specialized skills that they can't find a Canadian to do, or you're not doing anything that a Canadian wouldn't want to do. Okay, so when we talk about permanent residence, you'll see that oftentimes having that job offer, having 1 year of high-skilled work experience is very important. And if you can't get your work within that, if let's say you do a 1 year program, you only get a 1 year work permit, right? So you may need to do another program, because if you do a 2 year program, you get a 3 year work permit. If you do a 1 year program and another 1 year program, you also get a 3-year work permit as well. Okay. So another very important thing you have to understand is that you have to have maintained full-time status as a student, and every semester in order to qualify for the postgrad work permit, except for the last semester. Last semester, they do allow you to go part-time because sometimes you may only need 1 or 2 classes to finish, okay? But every other semester, you're supposed to have full-time student status. If you don't, then you very well could be disqualified from getting a postgrad work permit at the end. So, you know, sometimes students will come to me and they'll say, Elizabeth, this semester is really difficult for me. Maybe there's health reasons, maybe there's financial reasons. I just can't maintain a full-time course load. Should I just go part-time? And I might tell them, you know what, it may be better for you to go to the school and tell them, you know, your situation and ask if they can give you an authorized leave and let you take off 1 semester. If they do, then you are still okay. You can't work during authorized leave, but you can take that 1 semester off. As long as it's under 150 days, you still would qualify for the postgrad work permit. Whereas if you were just studying part-time, then you wouldn't, you may not qualify for the postgrad work permit, okay? Now, the timeline. The timeline is super, super important, and you should keep this rule in your mind. You should apply for your postgrad work permit the earliest of either when your study permit expires or within 90 days of the completion of your program, okay? Some people, if you go on the website, IRCC, they'll say 180 days for you to apply for the postgrad. So you say, Elizabeth, how come you're telling us 90 days when website says 180 days? It's because of the fact that, you know, Zia told you one of the first slides she presented was talking about how you can maintain your status as a student. And once you stop studying, 90 days after you stop studying, you stop having student status. In order to qualify for postgrad work permit, you have to have student status, which means you have to have a study permit, and you have to apply within 90 days of you losing student status, you stopping studies. Otherwise, you lose your student status. Okay, so keep that rule in mind. Within 90 days of the first day that they tell you you've completed your studies. It's not the first day that you get your final transcripts or you get your degree or you get even that letter from the school. It's the first day that they've told you you completed your studies. Start counting from that day, 90 days from then. And you also have to make sure your study permit is valid. Now, if you have that situation, and this is why I'm telling you guys to go and extend your study permit if it's going to expire, you know, pretty around the time, especially with the strike going on, if your study permit is going to expire around the time that, you know, you finish. Because in order to start working while you are waiting for the work permit, you need to have a valid student permit, and you have to apply within the 90 days as well, okay? You know, during the COVID times, the borders in Niagara, they weren't really encouraging people to flagpole there. Excuse me. But now they have started opening up the borders in Niagara for you guys to also, you can apply for your postgrad work permits. You can flagpole at Niagara as well, but they have special flagpole hours. It's Tuesdays to Thursdays. And normally you have to line up pretty earlier if there are a lot of people lining up there to get there in time. Otherwise, you can always apply online and wait for the work permit. And as long as you meet the conditions I already told you guys about, then you can start working while you're waiting for your work permit. All right, let's talk about permanent residence. So the first one I want to talk to you guys about is Express Entry. I'm going to talk to you guys about the basic rules for it, but then I'm going to talk to you guys about what's really been happening with Express Entry and how some of the things that we can see for the future. Okay, so Express Entry, the basic structure, it goes like this. First, you create an online profile where you have to qualify under one of three categories: Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, and Federal Skilled Trades class. And then if you create an online profile, you get to be entered into the Express Entry pool. Just because you've entered into the Express Entry pool does not mean that you have applied for Express Entry. Okay, a lot of people get this confused. Oh, I've created a profile, I applied for Express Entry. You have not applied for anything yet. This does not count as you having applied for Express Entry. This just says you're a candidate, a potential candidate to be invited to apply, because under Express Entry system, you can only apply for permanent residence if you receive an invitation to apply. And how do you receive an invitation to apply? So first of all, they look at your points. So you have, you'll get a certain number of points based on your background. And also if you have a provincial nominee program linked nomination that's linked to Express Entry, okay? They are also now looking at certain things like the category that you have, you qualify under. And they may even move on to occupations based in the future. They're looking right now for people who have provincial nominations. So there's a lot of things that they look at to see whether or not you're invited to apply. This has really changed now from pre-COVID when they're just looking at points. Okay, so let's talk about how to get into the pool first. The first category is called the Federal Skilled Worker class. A lot of you may already qualify for this. To qualify for this, you have to have 1 year of high-skilled work experience that is continuous and in one occupation. And it has to be full-time. So 1 year of high-skilled, we talked about what high-skilled means. Right now it's not O, A, and B. Continuous, so no breaks in between. High-skilled work experience in one occupation for that one particular year. And it has to be full-time. So full-time is counted as 30 hours a week, 1,560 hours altogether. Okay. Then they look at your background, your language points, education, etc. And you have to meet a minimum score. This has nothing to do with the Express Entry score. This is the Federal Skilled Worker score. And also you'll have to have a certain amount of financial savings, around 13,000 for a single person. If you have additional family members, you add a couple thousand for each family member. And that's what you'll need in order to qualify for the Federal Skilled Worker class. Now, there's a second category called the Canadian Experience class. And this is the one that the government was very enthusiastically inviting last year. So last year, the government actually didn't invite anyone under the Federal Skilled Worker class because of COVID. They figured most people who qualified under the first one may be outside of Canada, and they wanted to concentrate on the Canadian Experience class people who have work experience in Canada. So the work experience to qualify for the Canadian Experience class is very different from the work experience I just described for the Federal Skilled Worker class. The work experience for the Canadian Experience class is 1 year in the last 3 years of work experience in Canada that you gained when you are not a full-time student, and it has to be high-skilled, and it has to be something where you are not self-employed, you are employed, okay, in Canada with a Canadian in Canada. So what does that mean? It means that we talked about high-skilled, okay? It does not have to be continuous, and it does not have to be in one occupation. So you could do different part-time jobs and add those hours together. At least 1 year, at least 1,560 hours. It has to be when you're not a full-time student. So the work experience you get while you're studying, while you're, there's a strike, all of that work experience does not count towards that. It's only after you've graduated that it will count. If you have a spouse who has an open work permit, well, they're not a full-time student, their work experience could count towards that. Okay, so that's the main thing that you guys will need. The language points, most of you will already meet it because you're going to school. That's not the main language points that we'll be concerned about. The language points that we'll need you to have in order to get an invitation to apply will likely be much higher. But the work experience, this one is the one that really defines what Canadian Experience Class is. The skill to trades, we don't normally look at that a lot for you guys. You'll need to have an LMIA or certification in certain construction trades for the most part. And cooks and chefs as well are in there. Okay. So let's say you can get into the pool. How many points can you get for Express Entry? Well, let's look at some of the factors. So age, once you get to your 30s, your age points every year, it goes down. And in the 30s, it goes down by 5 or 6 points. In the 40s, it's a fast slide, -10, -11. Every year you get older. 45, the good news is it doesn't go down anymore. The bad news is it's 0. So, age, there's not a lot you can do about age, but apply as earlier as possible. Education is very important. So if you already have a 3-year program and then you're doing another 1-year program, for example, the one you're doing at Mohawk, then that really makes your points jump as well. Okay. A language is very, very important for Express Entry. Normally, if you don't have work experience in Canada, especially, we're looking at you needing a language score of at least maybe 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, and 8 in listening, or in CELPIP, that's for IELTS, or for CELPIP, you're going to need a 9. Okay. Okay, so the relevant Canadian work experience. The Canadian work experience that you'll need to have is very similar to the work experience that I described for the Canadian Experience Class. The only difference is we can count the work experience that you have in the past 10 years for this. Foreign work experience is also important if it's HighSkilled. Normally, there's 2 levels. If you have 1 year of work experience, you get certain amount of points. If you have 3 years of work experience, you get another level of points that you may be able to get. Spouse, let's talk about a spouse. Who is your spouse? So of course, someone who you're married to, but we also look at common law relationships. Common law relationships are anyone that you've had a relationship, you've lived together with them for at least 1 year, okay? And it's very important to mark that 1 year because that's when immigration deems you to be a family. And your spouse's education, language, and Canadian work experience could also add towards the points as well. Provincial Nominee Program, we'll talk about Express Entry linked Provincial Nominee programs as well. But it's not any Provincial Nominee Program that will give you 600 points for this. It has to be Express Entry linked Provincial Nominee programs. Previous study in Canada, so studying at Mohawk, you'll get 15 points, which is great. arranged employment. A lot of people think, oh, I have a job offer, therefore I have arranged employment, right? Not necessarily. If you have a post-grad work permit, then you don't get the arranged employment points because these are employer-specific work permits or LMIAs. If you have siblings who are Canadians or permanent residents in Canada, you get 15 points. Fluency in French is very important. So if you are fluent in French, it's probably going to be worth it for you to do the French exam, TEF or TCF, I believe, as well. And then trade certification, you get some points, but you'll have to get the trade certification for your trade. And those are the construction trades and cooks and chefs, as I mentioned before. Okay. So what's been happening with Express Entry lately is it's a little bit of an anomaly, I would say. So let me give you guys a little bit of a timeline. Prior to COVID, Express Entry was more predictable than now. The points were going around, fluctuate a little bit, but probably going around 460s to 470s or so. And they invited basically everybody in the pool every time they had a draw who was above that number. Then COVID struck. And the government decided, well, the priority should be people who qualified under the Canadian Experience class because these are people who are in Canada. And at that point, the borders are closed and Canada didn't really want to encourage people from outside of the country to come into Canada. So starting in 2020, there were only a few draws for federal skilled worker class. Mostly it was for Canadian Experience class. 2021, there was zero draws for federal skilled worker class. It was all Canadian Experience class. And at one point, they just invited everybody in the pool who qualified under Canadian Experience class. And then the points went down really low to around the 300s range for a while. And then all of a sudden, in October, they stopped inviting people for Express Entry. The only people they invited were people who had provincial nominee programs, nominations, okay? And it continues from October to this day that so far, every time they have a draw, they normally have a draw every 2 weeks. It's under the provincial, just provincial nominees are invited. So there was a leaked internal memo in January where it appears that the government was overly enthusiastic last year with programs, Express Entry, but also there was a TR to PR program where they invited too many people and they had filled up the inventory for this year, last year in November. So as a result, what the government decided to do was to limit the draws for a while. The minister has said that they will start inviting people again. He didn't say when, hopefully it's soon. My thinking it might be later this year and probably in the latter half of this year, because that will allow them to land people, normally 6 months processing time. That will allow them to land people, let's say by next year for the inventory for next year, okay? So let me talk about the Express Entry linked provincial nominee program, because that's the only program right now where people can get invited to apply for now. Hopefully later on, they'll invite other people who don't have this. But you know, if you can get this is also really good because it adds 600 points to your score, which basically assures that you're going to be able to be invited to apply. Okay, so how does this work? First of all, so basically, let me go back a little bit and talk about what provincial nominee programs are. So immigration is federal jurisdiction and Express Entry is a federal program. But the federal government has made an agreement with every province to allow each province to also select people that they want to get permanent residence. So that's called the Provincial Nominee Program. Okay. Now, Ontario has a provincial nominee program that they call the OINP, Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. And we're going to be talking about express entry linked streams here. And then Zia is going to also talk about other provincial nominee programs in Ontario, which are not, doesn't have anything to do with express entry. Okay, so with express entry linked streams, you can't just apply directly for these programs. I kind of like to use this analogy called with, you know, Bumble, you know, that dating app where, you know, the guys, they can't contact the women first. The women see who is in the pool, and then the women contact the guys, and then the guys can then communicate with the women. Okay, so this is a similar sort of situation. Imagine that you guys are the guys, you can put yourself into the pool, but OIMP are the women. The OIMP goes and searches through the pool. If they are interested in you, they will send you a notification of interest. It's only when they tell you that they're interested in you, can you then go and apply with them. Okay. So there are 3 categories that of like, who are they interested in? There are 3 categories that they said that they would be interested in. Okay, the first is the human capital stream. This is for people who already have a bachelor's degree. And then they haven't really said exactly who they want to invite. Right now, we're looking mostly at occupation-based. So they have said that the tech draws, which is, there are a few listed tech occupations. And if you have a background in that, they often invite people, but they're also looking at your express entry points that you have as well. So if you have occupation and you have pretty high points, then they might give you a notification of interest. Other times they have looked at other occupations as well. So it depends on them, but in order to even have a chance, you have to have a bachelor's degree. They also really like French speaking people. Okay, so you lucky French speakers, if you have a certain level in French, and you have your French degree, you have your French test results, and you have a bachelor's degree, then you could also receive a notification of interest if your point level is at a certain level. Then finally, what's very interesting, because I know that there are some of you who are in the construction trades, this is very interesting. So if you have worked in Ontario for 1 year and it's in one of the specified trades, which are mostly construction. I think baker is also in there as well, okay? And you can do this with your postgrad work permit. Then Ontario often says they're interested in inviting you to apply. They do look at the number of points that you have, but they are quite interested in this, okay? So that's the skilled trades. So these are the 3 sort of categories of people that Ontario is interested in you. A little bit different from a Bumble profile, but kind of similar. They're looking at your background, they're looking at your, education and what do you do, and, okay. All right, Zia, take it away. Let's talk about non-express entry.
Definitely. So Elizabeth has gone through some of the express entry streams. There are other OINP streams that work outside of express entry. So you don't need to qualify for any of the express entry streams that Elizabeth just talked about. You don't have to have an express entry profile first. For these non-express entry streams, as of April last year, OINP has implemented an expression of interest system. So what this means is that you first have to create a profile in Ontario's pool. And in this pool, once you've created your profile, you get a score. Based on your score, Ontario will do draws and invite the highest scoring individuals to apply to the province. Now, Ontario's point systems looks at factors like Canadian work experience, education, language proficiency. But what you don't see in Ontario's points is age, which is a huge factor in the Express Entry system. We also don't see any points being allocated for spouses or, the spouse's background, your marital status. None of that applies when we're looking at the expression of interest system. Now, another one of the big differences with the Ontario system is that each of these non-express entry streams, and we'll talk about the different streams in a moment, but each of the non-express entry streams has a different combination of these factors that make up their point system. So what we're trying to say here is that when you're qualified for one of the non-express entry streams, your first step is creating a profile, going in Ontario's pool. But when you go into the pool, it's not a general pool for all the streams. The pool that you go into is specific to the category, to the program that you're applying through. And so the way that points are allocated, the people you're compared to, is based on that program that you're qualified through. So each stream has its own pool. You're only compared to others in the same pool as you. Draws for the Ontario programs, they happen multiple times a year, but there's no announcements in advance as to when a draw is going to happen, what the minimum score that's going to be required is. None of that is announced in advance. So if you do qualify for any of these streams, you do want to think about going into the pool as soon as possible, so you're part of as many draws as you can be while you qualify and while this is an option available for you. So let's take a look at these different streams. With Ontario, there are 3 streams particular to those individuals who have a permanent job offer. So these are the employer-based streams, okay? With the employer-based streams, there's requirements on the company, the employer that's providing you the job offer, the position that you're being offered, and on you as the applicant. So 3 different things to keep in mind. The employer requirements are the same across all 3 programs. So let's look at that first. The company that's supporting your application for permanent residence, they have to have been in business for at least 3 years at the time that you're applying to Ontario. In addition to that, they have gross income and requirements, and a requirement in terms of the number of employees that they have. The specific numbers do depend on where the company is located. So if the employer is inside of the Greater Toronto Area, they have to demonstrate that they have grossed at least $1 million in their past fiscal year, and that they have 5 full-time employees that are either Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Now, those numbers decrease if we're talking about an employer that's located outside of the Greater Toronto Area. So the gross income goes down to $500,000, and they only need to have 3 full-time employees that are Canadians or permanent residents at the time that you're applying to Ontario. Regardless, in order to go through these employer-based streams, you do need to have a full-time permanent job offer. Okay, when we say permanent job offer, what we're talking about is that the contract that you're being provided is for an indeterminate amount of time. So there's no end date that's listed on that contract. Okay, if it says that it's a 2-year contract, if it says it's a 3-year contract, that automatically means that it's not a permanent position, which would not qualify for these employer-based streams. Let's take a look at these 3 streams. So the first one is for international students. Okay, this is for individuals who have finished a program of study here in Ontario. Now, you have to apply within 2 years of your graduation from an eligible program. The 2-year period starts, basically goes up until the date, 2 years from the date that your actual degree or diploma was awarded to you. So we don't consider the time when you finished your program of study like we do for the postgrad work permit. We look to your actual degree itself, the date that's on there. From that point in time, you have 2 years to apply to the international student stream. It is also important that you look at the actual program that you have finished as well. So there are specific programs that are eligible for this international student stream. So either you've completed a program that's at least 2 years in length here in Ontario, or you've completed a program that's 1 year, but it requires a degree as a prerequisite in order to be admitted to that program of study. This is really important. If you look at the admission requirements for your program, let's say you do a 1-year program, you want to go back, take a look at the admission requirements. If the admission requirement says a degree or diploma, or if it says a degree or work experience, that program will not be eligible for this international student stream. OIMP is very particular in that the program, the 1-year program that you complete has to require a degree and not a degree or diploma or a degree or work experience. Additionally, with the international student stream, the job offer does have to be high skilled. And in terms of the wage that you're being offered, it has to meet the entry-level wage for your position. The second program that falls under this employer-based streams is for skilled workers. The difference with the skilled worker program is that you have to have at least 2 years of work experience within the past 5 years in the same occupation that you're using to support your OIMP application. Okay, so that 2 years of experience can't just be in any position. It has to be in the same occupation code as your job offer that you're using for your OIMP application. The work experience doesn't have to be in Canada. It can be anywhere in the world, but it is a minimum 2 years cumulative of work experience. When we're looking at these two, the international student and the skilled worker, you'll notice one of the biggest differences is that the international student stream does not have any work experience requirements. Okay, you don't need to have any work experience to qualify under the international student stream. So it's something that you can look at applying for as soon as you're finished your program, as long as it is an eligible program. With the skilled worker stream, there's no education requirements that are associated with it, but there's the work experience part, right? The 2 years of experience. And it's important to keep, the reason that we're going through all these different options here is because you want to think about which ones you may qualify for. If you have a spouse, which ones your spouse might qualify for. Together, you guys are a team, right? One of you might be studying, the other may be working and be able to qualify for and apply for permanent residence sooner. So you want to really think about all these different options for both of you. The last one with the Ontario's employer-based streams is the in-demand occupations. For this program, the applicant does need to have at least 9 months of work experience in Ontario in the same occupation as the job offer. So it doesn't necessarily have to be with the same employer, but that work experience has to be in Ontario in the same NOC code as the position that you're using to support the OIMP application. When we look at the in-demand stream, this is the only program that Ontario has that includes low-skilled occupations. So this in-demand program is not just any occupation. There's a list of occupations that qualify for this stream. And on there, we see low-skilled occupations, okay? So if your spouse working in a low-skilled position, you may not qualify for any of the programs that we've talked about earlier, but this in-demand program may be one that works great for you.
And I also wanted to have you guys keep in mind some of the considerations. So if you guys are in Hamilton and you find a job there, yay, it's outside of the GTA. Your employer can be a lot smaller, and especially for things such as, a lot of retail and restaurant, and that have been hard hit by COVID. It may be easier to find an employer that qualifies because they only have to have 3 full-time employees, right? And have a gross income of 500,000. The other thing is this in-demand stream. It's not any low skilled. There's a list, and a lot of them are farm workers, factory workers if it's outside of Toronto. Take a look at it. Some laborers, construction laborers, etc. Okay, so this is not, like Zia said, it's not just for you. If you have a spouse, it doesn't matter who qualifies first. The whole family gets it as long as one person qualifies. So think about this, these things in terms of not just yourself, but also your family as well. Okay. Now, this is another program for occupations that are often considered low skilled. Oh, by the way, the in-demand stream also includes nurses' aides as well. So for those in healthcare, that could also be something there. Now, the caregiver program is a little bit different from the in-demand. So in-demand nurses' aid, you have to be employed by an employer, like a company that is large enough to satisfy the criteria. The caregiver program is for those people who get hired by like a family for them to care for family members at home, their children, elderly people, or disabled persons. Okay, you have to have 2 years of work experience doing this, and you can do this with your postgrad work permit. If your postgrad work permit is about to expire, we may be able to file an extension based on this caregiver program, because you can apply for a work permit to work and get while you're gathering your experience for this. You need to have a 1-year post-secondary education, which all of you should have. And the language benchmark is 5, which is a lower benchmark. Now, the only thing about the caregiver program is there is a quota every year. This year, the one to care for children was filled up really, really fast. I think just a few days after it opened. But I believe the elderly and the disabled person is still open. So that's something to consider as well. Okay. The one thing about the caregiver program is, since it's opened, though, it has been very, very slow in processing. It opened in 2019, and actually I don't know of any applications that have come to fully be processed at this time yet. Okay. All right, so let's talk about next steps, because there's a lot of information. What should you be doing next?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to keep in mind is that you need to have an immigration plan, right? So what are your immigration goals? How do you get there? You want to plan out what your route is to meet those immigration goals, whether it's whatever it may be. What we've talked about here today is really just the tip of the iceberg, right? There are so many different programs with immigration in terms of applying for work permits, in terms of applying for permanent residence. It's really important that you sit down and speak with a professional, a lawyer who's able to go through your background and prepare an immigration plan that's tailored to you. So not any generic plan, really looking at your background and determining how you can meet your immigration goals.
And then once you have that plan, you may not be able to qualify yet, but it's not, sometimes people say, oh, well, I'll come to you after I qualify. No, that's not a good time to go to someone. You should go to someone before, so you know what you need to do in order to qualify as early as possible. Because there probably will be things that you need to do in order to qualify. And you have to have that determination. If this is what you want to do, you'll have to make time for that and do it. You guys can do it. You guys have, achieved so much already by being here. But there may be a little bit more that you need to do. So for example, you need to study and take practice exams, for example, for the language tests, right? Oftentimes, even if English is your first and only language, if you don't really know what to expect when you're doing it, you may not get the score that you need. So do take some practice exams. Do practice for these language exams. Looking at the work permit, you may, if you're doing a 1-year work permit, is that a 1-year program, you only get a 1-year work permit, is that enough time for you to find a job? Do you need to find a job in order to get permanent residence? Sometimes these things are things that you have to think about and to budget, and with regard to your timing as well.
Like we talked about right from the beginning of this presentation, make sure that you stay in status. While you're here in Canada, really important that you're in status, that you're following all the rules that are attached to that status, and very importantly, that you're not misrepresenting yourself in any immigration applications. This can be inadvertent, it can be a mistake, it can be a result of not knowing, but it can have huge consequences on your applications and on your future here in Canada. When IRCC makes a determination that you've misrepresented, you're actually banned from submitting any further applications for a period of at least 5 years. At the end of that 5 years, anything that you do try and apply for is obviously going to be very highly scrutinized, and it can make it much more difficult to try and meet those immigration goals that you've set out for yourself.
And I'd also like to add that, you know, you might have some friends who did it and they got their PR, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the story, because there are a lot of situations where immigration catches on to these crooked consultants, for example, who have, you know, submitted false documents, helped you submit false information. And if they ever do find that you have misrepresented, you could lose your permanent residence, you could lose your Canadian citizenship. So it's not really worth it to have that hanging over your head. You need to be able to sleep at night. And you guys are in a very good situation. Believe it or not, the government puts the highest priority on people such as yourself. Okay, so have a good plan, and if you do it early, there usually are paths for you to get permanent residence the right way. Now, here's the situation. If you guys, hopefully you guys are hiring good lawyers to help you from the beginning so you don't get yourself into the situation. But if you do get yourself into the situation where, for example, an application is rejected, you need to contact a lawyer right away. There are very strict federal court deadlines to file a notice for judicial review, where the court will look at an application if it's not fair for you, okay? Also, you know, when you call the call center, here's the thing about the call center, okay? They're not necessarily there for you. The call center, they have their own interests. They're there for the immigration interests. And oftentimes the advice that they give you is wrong, or it might not be in your best interest. So let's say you call the call center and you say, this is such as happened to me. And they say, okay, well, I'll put a note on your file. First of all, you don't know what notes they're putting on your file. It could be, you know, wrong notes or etc. But also they can say, oh, why don't you just send a letter to immigration and explain yourself? And if you do that, you don't really know what to say and it's rejected again, you don't get a second kick at a can. If you've done that and then you come to me and say, Elizabeth, I got this rejected, this reconsideration rejected, can you go send another letter? I said, I can't, because immigration only looks at one, what's called reconsiderations as well, okay? There are also other situations where, you know, you may be out of status. If you've, you know, filed your postgrad work permit, was rejected, then you may be out of status. Restoration time comes into play. So all of these things means don't sit on it. You know, you get this rejection, you must act right away and contact a lawyer right away. All right, so this is our contact information. If you want to book a consultation, so we offer special discount for Mohawk students who come to our webinar. So do let us know you've attended our webinar and we'll give you the discount. It's $100 for our consultations for you guys. Yeah, just email us and we're happy to, you know, help you make a plan for your situation. Okay, let's go over some questions, shall we? Wow, we have 58 questions so far. Probably won't be able to get through everything, but let's pick and choose and see.
Definitely.
All right.
So the first question here, Elizabeth, for you is the process of applying for a postgrad work permit. Does it require that we stop working while we're applying for it online?
So no, so basically what what we went through is if you have your study permit, valid study permit at the time when you have submitted your application and you submit it within that 90 days period I told you guys, then you can start working as soon as you have submitted your application. Okay. Zia, my study permit expires by the end of September and my program has placement from September to mid-October. So do I have to apply to extend the study permit and change it to a placement co-op work permit? Should I apply for both permits? What should this person do?
Yeah, so definitely, if you have a co-op requirement for your program, in order to be able to do that co-op, you need to have a co-op work permit. So before you start in that position, in that co-op position, you need to apply and receive that co-op work permit so that you're able to start working and finish that co-op position. In your case, in this case here, if we're looking at someone who's applying, whose study permit's expiring before the end of their actual program of study, so before they're going to have finished their program, then it sounds like, you know, you do want to think about applying to extend your study permit and look at applying for the co-op work permit as well. And yes, you can apply for both at the same time. Okay, next question, Elizabeth. Study permits extensions right now seem to be taking a very long time. If the so let's say I've applied for my study permit, it's going to be expiring, my study permit extension, and it's going to be, my current study permit is going to be expiring March 31st. I have no update right now. Am I okay to continue studying, and when will I get a decision?
So as long as, like Zia was talking about with the implied status, as long as you've filed it properly, by filing it properly, it means you've submitted your fees, you submitted the right form, and you press that button, so you got a confirmation that you've submitted. Okay, as long as you've done that before your study permit expires, you can continue to study. You can continue with your status until you get your decision. Okay, so don't worry too much. I know they are taking a while, but as long as you've done that, you can continue to be studying peacefully. But don't leave the country, okay? Because your implied status ends if you leave the country. So stay in the country until you get your study permit. Okay, this person has an advanced diploma. Is it possible to apply for a postgrad work permit, work towards PR? I'm not sure what that means. Hussam, do you know what this person means by having an advanced diploma?
That just means that it's potentially a 3-year program. And basically, I guess I'll answer on your behalf. Of course, I mean, that would still be, you know, a program that would allow you to apply for a postgraduate work permit and potentially get PR.
Okay, great. Do we need to have an LOA to apply and extend our status as a student? So basically, I guess this is, normally you have a LOA to apply for a study permit, but I think it's good to have also something from the school to show that you're still registered as a student, especially for the strikes, to extend your status as a student.
Yeah, exactly. So really what's important when you're doing the study permit extension is showing that you are here, actually, you are studying, so you have been complying with the conditions of your study permit to date. Okay.
Yeah. Zia, in HighFlex,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Zia, in HighFlex classes, so I guess those are hybrid flex classes, where they can attend their classes online. Does it affect their postgrad work permits?
This is a great question. Right now, during COVID, it does not affect your eligibility for your postgrad work permit, nor does it affect the length of your postgrad work permit. So if you're doing your classes online, if you're in Canada and doing them online, it's fine. It does not have an effect on your postgrad work permit. Pre-COVID, we did see that, yes, it could be problematic just depending on the percentage in terms of how many classes you did online versus how many you did in person. But during COVID, it's been fine. Okay, Elizabeth, if my visa expires in August, can I apply for the extension now?
Within 5 months. So it depends on what you mean by visa. Visa is something where you need it to travel. If you leave Canada and the US, you can actually re-enter from the US if you're only good to the US with just your study permit. You don't need a visa. Some people, if you're from a visa requiring country, you're traveling outside Canada in the US, you want to come back to Canada, you need a visa. Okay, so if that's what you mean, normally, yeah, around the 4 month to 5 month mark, you can try to apply for an extension, but you have to know that your visa is going to be for the same length of time based on something. So normally a visa is based on the length of time as your study permit. So if your study permit is going to expire in 4 months, I don't necessarily know that it's a right time to apply for a visa. You might want to get your work permit first before you go and apply for your visa. So this person says, how can I calculate my working hours to file taxes if I work for Uber part-time? Will it count from the time I activate the app?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if this is a tax question, so I don't necessarily know that this is a great one for filing taxes. You have to. Sorry, yeah.
No, sorry. I was just going to jump in and just recommend that that student reach out to Money, which is a department here at Mohawk College that helps students with their taxes. Money, just Google Money Mohawk College. You should get right on the website and book an appointment with them. They should be able to help you with that.
That's great. Just one thing about Uber, guys, is that you have to understand if you're going to use that work experience for immigration, it's limited as to what you can do because A, that is not necessarily high skilled, and B, that's going to be normally counted as self-employment because you're a contractor. So that you can't really, use that as an employment situation. Okay. Let's say this person says, if we do 1 to 2 courses on a 3rd semester during the summer, then can we still work full-time during the break?
So if this summer semester is supposed to be a regularly scheduled break for you and you decide to take courses during that break, you are still able to work full time, even though you're also doing courses at the same time. It really goes back, the ability to work on your study permit and how many hours you can work goes back to your program of study and the academic calendar for your program. If it is supposed to be a summer break and that's part of your program, you can work full time regardless of whether you also decide to do classes as well. Okay, how long do we need to wait after we finish classes and receive the final grades to get the documents from the college to apply for a postgrad work permit?
I think that's more of a question for you, Hussam.
Sorry, so the question was from Remy?
From Nestor. How long do we need to wait after finishing classes and receiving the final grades to get the documents from the college?
So my understanding is that the grad list comes out May 19th, right? So that means that, regardless of when you actually complete your last exam, generally Mohawk College will have the grad list out on May 19th, I believe by 12 p.m. So once you know for sure that you're a graduate, then you can apply for a postgraduate work permit.
Okay. And does Mohawk issue a letter saying that they've completed the program?
Potentially, I'm not 100% sure. In the past, students have just kind of relied on that graduation list. Once they see their name on it, that implies that they have completed the program. But I believe that if you ask for a letter, you should be able to get one.
Okay, great to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's very important because you also have to submit your transcripts, right? Because the officers want to know that you were a full-time student throughout all of your programs, and the way that they look at it is from your transcripts to see how many courses you've completed. Okay. Zia, they've asked, is it necessary to attach an intention letter for the postgrad work permit? to explain why they did the particular program?
So what goes into your postgrad work permit will obviously depend on your application, your circumstances, how you've been, what your status has been here in Canada. So generally maybe not, but again, it will depend on if there's anything particular about your situation, or if you've stopped studying part-time for a certain period of time. It just depends on your situation. I would recommend, if this is a question, to contact us for a consultation appointment so we can go through your background, your situation, and really determine what you need to do.
Okay.
Elizabeth, what makes a student a part-time student?
It's up to the school. And do you have a definition of a part-time and full-time student over there?
The exact percentage escapes me, but I want to say it's 60%, but please do not take that as a final answer. I can certainly, whoever is asking that question, please connect with me via email, and I can double check for you just to make sure in terms of workload, the course load, right? Whether it's that specific percentage, but we can double check on that for you.
And oftentimes we see sometimes, I'm not sure with Mohawk, but some of the other schools, the transcripts may not be that clear, especially for courses that you do over 2 semesters. They may give a grade in only 1 semester. And sometimes, like I've had another school where it didn't even show up in another semester, and that person actually did the course, and that it was like a 2-semester course. So if your transcripts look a little bit odd, it's very important that there is a proper explanation that is made. Otherwise, the officer may think, oh, you only have 2 courses in 1 semester, then probably you're a part-time student in there. Okay. Okay.
Okay, here's a good question. If I have a co-op work permit and the strike happens, can I work full-time on that co-op work permit during the period of the strike?
Well, that's an interesting situation. So if you have a co-op work permit, the co-op work permit allows you to work in the work that is integral to your studies. Okay, so just because you co-op work doesn't mean you can just work randomly everywhere. Okay, you can work part-time off campus based on your study permit, but the co-op work permit allows you to do the co-op program work. So if you are on your co-op placement when the strike happens, Hussam, in that situation, I mean, they're not affected by the strike, right? Because the faculty is on strike, but they can still do the co-op program. Is that right? Or is that going to be an issue because the faculty is not there to sign off on it?
That's a great question. The co-op specialists who are, in charge of the co-op placements are not necessarily under the faculty or in that union. So I want to guess probably not affected. But again, there's so much gray area here. I'm not 100% sure about that either. But obviously, as support staff myself, I'm not affected by the strike either in terms of our services. So it would have to be sort of a discussion to have with the co-op specialist in that specific program.
So do check with your programs, guys, if you are doing your co-op. If you can, that would be great, because then you can do your co-op program while the strike is going on. And if you can, then you can still continue to be working towards the finishing your program. Okay. It says our spouses should be waiting until we get at least 3 pay stubs to apply to extend their work permits, or can we do it together if we already have a job already related to your career?
So with spousal work permits, you do have to show that you are working in a high-skilled position. So the spouse, the international student who's on the postgrad work permit or applying for the postgrad work permit does have to have a high-skilled position in order for the spouse to get an open spousal work permit. That's part of the mandatory requirements. IRCC requires the 3 pay stubs. Elizabeth, what do you do with clients when they're trying to apply together? So if the spouse doesn't have,
you know what, there are certain documents that you have to submit, otherwise your application is returned. So the documents that you have to submit, the forms and the fees, and you press that button, okay? There are other documents that you should submit, otherwise it will get rejected. You won't have implied status, okay? You'll have implied status, but it'll be rejected. And those are some of the things, for example, a letter to show that you have a high-skilled job offer, because your spouse won't be able to get a work permit if you don't have a high-skilled job offer when you're on your postgrad work permit. So that letter, if you don't have that letter, your spouse can still get implied status. They can work until a decision is made, but that decision might be negative. Same thing sort of with the pay stubs. The website says you should have 3 pay stubs. It's a recommendation. It's not necessarily that the officer wouldn't give it to you if you didn't have 3 pay stubs. Okay, if you had that letter saying that showing that you are working there, you can submit it. And what I often do is the work permits now take for example 3 or 4 months to review. During that time, you'll have 3 pay stubs. Then I follow up the application with that. Especially if your spouse's work permit is about to expire, I normally would try to submit an extension before it expires, just so that they can continue to work as well.
This goes back to the first thing we talked about today. Make sure you're maintaining your status while you're here in Canada. It applies for the international student, it applies for spouses. Anyone who's here in Canada, you do want to make sure you're maintaining your status. And so part of that, like Elizabeth said, if it's expiring, you want to make sure you're submitting that extension application. If it needs to be followed up with the pay stubs after, that's great. It's an option. It just depends on your situation.
If you guys don't mind, I'm just going to go back to the question about the course load for part-time and full-time. So I do have an answer, and it was 60%. So the minimum full-time course load is 60% course load per term, or 40% course load per term for students with permanent disabilities.
Fantastic. Great. And so normally if your course load is 5, then you have to do 3, basically.
Okay, Elizabeth, we've gotten a couple questions here about the length of the postgrad work permit. So can we go over, if someone has done a 1-year program, whether that's 8 actual months, but 1 academic year, how long is that postgrad work permit going to be valid for?
So the postgrad work permits work on a basis of academic years, not calendar years. So if a normal academic year is 2 semesters, then normally you should get a 1-year work permit. If a normal academic year is 2 semesters and you do a 16-month program with no breaks in between, then you can argue that it's 2 academic years and you can get a 3-year work permit, okay? So it's based on academic years, not calendar years per se.
Now, related to that, what if I'm registered and I complete a 2-year program, but I do it in 1.5 years? So the length of the actual program is 2 years, but I fast-tracked it. I've done it in 1 year or 1.5 years. What's the length of the postgrad work permit that I'm going to be entitled to?
So if you are special and you accelerated because you're special, then you can apply, you can say it's accelerated, and then you can ask for the 3-year work permit. But if your program, everybody in the program does it, so you're not special, then the program is the length of the program. So likely the officer will give it to you according to the actual length of the program. I believe.
So I guess what we're trying to, so I guess what we're trying to say here is that it's really based on the actual length of the program as the school has stated it, right? So if the school has stated it's a 2-year program, if you do it in 1 year, fantastic, you're still eligible for the 3-year postgrad work permit because the program itself is stated as being a 2-year program. If the program is less than 2 years, it's 1.5 years, then that's where you would be entitled to less than the 3-year work permit.
Right. Hussam, we're at the 1.5 hour length. How long do we have?
You have until 2 o'clock. So it's totally up to you in terms of your schedule and what you can do.
Okay.
But I just wanted, before we move on, I just wanted to clarify something, because this is a question that comes up quite often in terms of fast-tracked programs. So let me give you a situation. So let's say the social service worker program at Mohawk College is a 2-year program, right? So it takes 2 full years to complete. However, there's a fast track option for that program, meaning that you can complete it in 16 months. So just to clarify, if you complete the fast track 16 months, you're still eligible for the 3-year postgraduate work permit because technically it's a 2-year program. Am I correct about that?
That's correct.
I would say yes.
That is.
But oftentimes the postgrad work permit officers, so if that is the case, you really have to make a case for it. It's not necessarily, you have to show it very, very clearly that it isn't falls under the accelerated program. So it should be, but postgrad workers oftentimes can be funny. So it depends on the officer's discretion as to whether they think that it falls under the accelerated program exception for that. Yeah.
Okay.
I actually don't have that much time left. So how about we do 2 questions each, and then we call it a day.
That's great.
Okay?
That's great.
All
Thank
right.
you. Yeah.
Okay. So Zia, one question for you. For the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, employer-based, if a graduate with a college diploma, is that valid to qualify for that category? Let's talk about the international students program, the category with a college diploma.
Certainly. Yeah, certainly. So OINP's international student stream requires that you finished a program here in Canada. It has to be an eligible program for Ontario. When we look at eligible programs, we're looking at the length of the program of study. If the program was 2 years or longer, generally it's fine, okay? It's where you have your 1-year diploma program, for example, where we have to look at the admission requirements for the program in order to see if that will be considered an eligible program. So your 1-year program that you've completed, you want to look at the admission requirements. If those admission requirements say that you need a degree in order to be eligible, then fantastic, it qualifies for OINP. If the admission requirement says that you can be eligible based on a degree or a diploma, a degree or work experience, then that 1-year program is not eligible for the OINP international student stream.
Right. So you're really looking at the college's admission requirements there. Okay. And, if you don't qualify for the international student stream, there is the foreign worker stream, but you have to have 2 years of work experience in order to qualify for that. And your salary has to be at a median level.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question for you, Elizabeth, trying to find a good one here, because there are quite a few that have come up.
Oh, well, I found something here. This person asked, if there's no sure PR pathway in Ontario for me, is it okay to try another province? What are the pros and cons of going to another province after graduation?
That's a great question. I think what you would want to do is, and this applies to a lot of the questions that are coming in about an individual's background, is schedule a consultation appointment. We can go through your background. We can determine what the options are available to you. Every province is different. Every province has their own PNP programs, own streams, their own criteria. Some are definitely easier than applying through Ontario, for example. And so, we do want to look at what's best for you. Now, whenever you're applying through a provincial program, though, you do have to demonstrate that you have an intent to live and work in that province, right? And so, because provinces are looking for their own development, right? And so they're looking for someone who's going to contribute and really stay in that province. So, there are definitely better programs. There are other programs out there, but which one works best for you will depend on a variety of factors. And so I think have a consultation appointment. Let's go through your background. Let's figure out what works based on your situation. Did you want to add anything to that, Elizabeth?
No, I mean, every province has, their own quirks. And sometimes you think, oh, Saskatchewan, for example, looks so great. But Saskatchewan will also require you to have a job there. So one of the most important things is to, I think, look for a place where you can actually get a job that satisfies the requirements. So once you have a plan, look for something there. It's not necessarily that, oh, another province is easier. It's easy if you can get a job there. It's not one of the reasons it's easy is because oftentimes there aren't that many jobs over there, and not a lot of people want to go there. Whereas Ontario, you may be able to get a job easier. Then it's probably easier to do it in Ontario. It just depends on your own circumstances.
There's another question that's related to that, Elizabeth. So if I get a nomination through a province, but while I'm doing the PR, I want to be able to move to another province. So let's say I've gotten a nomination in Ontario, but I'm applying for my permanent residence. While that's happening, I want to move to BC to do another program of study. Can I do that?
You can, but you will likely lose your nomination for the province. So provinces very jealously guard their programs in terms of whoever they nominate. They want to nominate people who are going to live in the province. They only get a certain quota of how many people they can nominate. And of course, they want to reserve that for people who are going to stay in the province. So if you've applied for a nomination, but you haven't received your permanent residence yet, then if you leave the province and they know, then you will likely lose your nomination. It's not that you can't, go on vacations, but if you leave by living somewhere else, then that's going to be an issue. Once you get your permanent residence, you can do whatever you want because your intentions can change. Even if you intend to live in Ontario, after a while, maybe life changes, you can move to another province. After you get your PR, that's okay. But before you get your PR, you should show that you intend to live in Ontario.
Perfect. Elizabeth, I have my final question for you here.
All right.
Work experience that someone's completed under their co-op work permit or while they're doing their studies, can they use that to apply for permanent residence?
For the most part, you can use it to qualify for the federal skilled worker class. But most of these programs normally look at the work experience you gained when you're not a full-time student. For most of them, some of them, there are exceptions to some of them, but for most of them, they do. It really depends on the program that you're going to apply for. So have a consultation, have a proper plan for yourself. Okay.
And to add to that, it may not just be the federal programs that we're looking at. We may want to consider the provincial programs as well, right? So we may be able to use that work experience to qualify and apply for a provincial program instead.
Absolutely. I mean, there are probably going to be new programs that are coming out maybe this year. The government has really put a priority, they've said, on international students and keeping you guys here because you guys are the cream of the crop. They really want you guys to stay. I hope they put their money where their mouth is and actually do it. But I will keep you guys informed. So, we'll send you off to the newsletters. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar, and we will be sending you guys the slides as well if you've registered for this as well. Okay.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much with your time. You guys have been very generous. It's been over an hour and a half, so that's lovely. I do want to say that, it seems like there's a lot of questions still. There's 73 people that are looking for answers. So I strongly recommend reaching out to Elizabeth and Zia to book an appointment. With their discount, I think, looking at your journey for PR, it's worth the money. It's worth connecting with a lawyer, a professional to make sure that you're on the right track and you're making the right decisions. So thank you again, Zia and Elizabeth, for joining us, and look forward to having you guys again in the future.
Thank you so much, Hussam. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.